Okay, since this is a German session, we have to be on time. I'm gonna start now. Okay, so I have to hold this this microphone because we are recording the session, but it's not really making my sound louder for you guys. So I hope you can still hear all the way to the back. So yeah, my name is Jens Landwehr. I'm glad that you made it to the German panel or special breakout. I'm going to give you a quick introduction to the session, what we are covering today. And then we're going to go, I'm going to pass on to the panelists, and each of them will have their section basically. And I would say we do questions after that, after we covered basically the whole journey. So I will start for the next 5 to 10 minutes with my personal story. I gave a little bit of an outline yesterday, but it was relatively brief. And today, again, I'm going to go again into the story, basically how we ended up, me and my husband, with our 2 children, what the choices were, and the questions and so forth. Then I'm going to pass on to the second panelist, Molly O'Brien. You met her this morning already. She will, no, sorry, we're going to go to you first. We're going to Dr. Melvin Thornton first, the IVF. He's an IVF doctor. He's going to cover basically the clinical aspects, and you may relate to our story, but you don't have to. We went through another clinic, so of course you all have a lot of choices. So we cover the medical parts, and then as a second part, we're going to hand it over to Molly O'Brien. You also met her before. She is a US Canadian lawyer. So we will cover the legal aspects that you will go through in the country that you choose surrogacy to go for surrogacy in. And then the third part of the panel, that will be with Mandy Pecher. That would be another, again, 10 to 12 minutes or so. Or actually, you have a little bit more. 15 to 20 minutes. We'll cover what we have, or you will have to do in Germany to complete your journey after the child is born. Yeah, we will cover that piece in German. So I'll start in English with my personal story. Hopefully that's okay for most of you, because then it's easier for you guys to refer or not refer, but maybe make some comments from your end. Okay, so now I'm going to start. I said it yesterday already. We have, my husband and I, we have a 8-year-old daughter and a 2-year-old son. We live in Essen, which is, yeah, well, you know where that is, in the west part of Germany. We started with this journey. I mean, I always knew that I wanted to have children. I don't know where this came from, but it was always there, this wish. I could only kind of see myself growing up with children. It was probably the people I met in my childhood or in my youth, where there was basically families that I could relate to more than people without children. I don't know where it came from, but it was always there. But of course, then at the time, I had to go to university. And I didn't have a husband. I didn't have money, so there were a lot of other things that distracted me. And there were, of course, no resources back in the 90s or even late 80s. It was just a dream, basically. Then I moved to California after I got my university degree in Munich, and California was already back then, I would say, 15 to 20 years ahead of the whole topic. I lived in San Francisco at the time, so there was a lot of discussion about adoption at the time in the early 90s. And actually, in 1991, I met the first couple that legally adopted a child as a couple in San Francisco. And still, this was very, very far away from me because they were much older than me at the time. And again, I didn't have a husband at the time. I was single. or had shorter relationships, shorter term relationships. Anyways, there was no, and I didn't have the financial means, and it was just again, it was a long time. For a long time, it was a topic that was very far away from me, and that's how the 90s, the whole decade of the 90s went by. So it was only after I met my husband in 1998, so 18 years ago. We still lived in the US, both of us at the time, but we were sort of ready to move back to Germany together, and we actually did move back together to Germany in the year 2000. And ever since that time, so since the year 2000, when we moved there together, initially to Cologne, it became the almost the main topic that was keeping us busy. And again, there were no fairs or anything like this at the time, so it was all about internet search, and we looked into the different options. And of course, we thought about adoption for a little while, but I wasn't particularly interested in adoption, partially also because it's not a legal option in Germany, but for some reason didn't appeal to me. We met with female couples several times then during that time, so that's the early 2000s now, that were interested in having a child with two gay men. We invited these women. We met with them, and it was just not a match for some reason. It didn't feel right. And for me, still, this option is not the logical option when you want to have a child as a gay couple. And then only years after doing research, after years of research, we found about this option of surrogacy, and of course had no idea what this was, how this would work, and we had to do our research, the research on our own, and we are probably one of the few couple, or one of the earliest couples in Germany, as Ron was saying yesterday, and we did our online research, and we found our agency online, CSP. They're not here today, but they're listed in the on the last page of your program. And we flew over to meet with them at the East Coast. They had an East Coast office, so we had to go there. It was not like what you can do here today. You can meet these agencies here, and then we met a couple of other agencies, but we went with them because in the end, because we felt comfortable. It was a good feeling, simply. We went for a second trip to south of LA to meet with them. And and then the process started. Basically, the most important first part of the journey was that we found out that it's not that you pick a surrogate mom, but that the surrogate mom picks you. So that's how and that's what we particularly liked about CSP, that's how they kind of framed it. So we had to write an application to available surrogate moms, and they would read basically our profile, and then they would make a pick. Can we imagine, to have a child for them? And that's what happened. That's how they frame it, and we really liked that. So we wrote the profile together, and we took pictures of us that we put in there, and that's how we met our first surrogate. And so we flew to Minneapolis and met her, and it was and we had this call. And yesterday I said there was no Skype at the time, so it was like 10 years ago. It was not love at first sight, but it was a lot of sympathy initially, already after the first conversation or in the first conversation. So if you can imagine to have this huge thing been done by this woman or not. And I heard about very different stories too. In reality, there are different stories that there's not a good match, and people still then do it, and I think you shouldn't do it if it's not a good match. So for us, the first surrogate mom for our daughter, it was really a really nice experience. She has her own son, who is an autistic son. So there was a special challenge there as well, because of course family was saying, you know, how can you have, you know, how can you choose a surrogate that has a unhealthy child? But of course, she's only the surrogate. She's not the biological mother, and autism isn't by any means. It's a genetic defect. So so you have to understand. You have to sort of know a few things in order to make your right choices, because it would have been a really bad choice to not work with her for us because she had an autistic child. It also made the relationship more intense over the years. And as I said, she is the one that sends the Christmas present. She never misses a Christmas or a birthday still. And my daughter's already 8 years old. And one other aspect I wanted to cover that I didn't talk about yesterday was that the question, who's going to be the biological father? So for me, it was always my wish, you know, to be a biological father. But of course, my husband then, after we decided to go into this, he also got into this idea of doing this, and we actually made the choice to use 2 embryos. There was some discussion in the morning whether this is good or bad, or some agencies doing it or some others don't, but we did this. So we fertilized eggs from both of us. We fertilized eggs with sperm, yes, sperm from both of us, and then the clinic actually decides which eggs you should use. And in our case, we wanted to use eggs from both, but maybe if the doctor had told us, and of course you do the spermiogram, you know what the quality of your sperm is before you actually start the process. If the fertility doctor had said you can't, one of us should not be the father, then that would have been the end of it for one of us. But it was okay. They were both category A or at least B plus embryos. So that's what we did. We used one of each, but we didn't know in the end, of course, because Heidi got pregnant. We didn't know who the biological father was, and I was talking about it in the documentary that maybe one or the other has seen. That was mentioned yesterday. When I saw my daughter, I thought it was my husband's child, because to me she looked like my husband, and I don't know why. It's maybe this inherent, you know, this feeling as a gay father, you cannot have a child. You know, that's how you grow up. Basically, your environment tells you that you cannot be a father. And so when we had our child, I still couldn't believe that I could be the father of this child. And I was telling you the story yesterday, and so it didn't matter to us who the father was. It was actually it was not a topic for us. We were always making this point towards our friends and family that we don't want to know, and we don't know, and we don't want to know, and treat her, you know, as if she was your biological grandchild. We told my parents, and we told my husband's parents, and so that's how it went for the first 3 years. That we left it completely open, and we didn't talk about it. It was almost like we kept it under the carpet. But then we were starting the discussion about the second child, and then, like what they call the sibling journey, or sibling child, and I was of course claiming that I should be the first. I mean, I should be the father of the second child, because I was assuming that I was not the father of the first child. And then my husband said, "Well, how do you know? You know that it's not your daughter." And yeah, it was a little complicated, the whole process, and like also he was often referring to my daughter. He was actually also referring to her as his biological child. I don't know if he meant it seriously, or it was more like a joke. You know how you joke about the quality of your sperm? So he was saying, "Well, I have the better sperm, so it's my child." And anyways, to make a long story short, we had to take the test. And father, how do you call this? Vaterschaftstest? Paternity test, yeah. So what we did is Andreas, my husband, he's a doctor. He took the test first, and because he said, well, we need to know, because otherwise, we're going to we're going the wrong way now, because the deal was between us that the other person obviously could be the father, who was not the father of the first child. So anyways, he took the test and the test came out negative for him. So he was not the father. 99% probability, but I said, no, the test is wrong. I'm not the father. I'm not the father, you're the father. The test is wrong. I'm going to be the father of the second child. I'm going to be the only one, donating for the second child. And he said, wait a minute. The test came back 99%. And then, of course, I took the test. And I took it secretly. I didn't tell my husband about it. But I took the test and it came out positive. So I'm the father of my first child, and yeah, it was an amazing, thing. It still made a difference. I have to admit that it does make a difference to hear about it, that you're actually the biological father. Like what I was just saying, that you're being told that this is not possible, but then it was possible. And for me, it was only possible really 3 years. My daughter was already 3 years old, that I then turned into the biological father of my daughter. But then at the same time, of course, it became clear that Andreas would be the father of our second child, and he was then actually the sole donor in the process. That turned then into our second child, our son, who was born in 2014. There was one, maybe as a last comment, there was one step in between, because we had another pregnancy in 2011 that was not successful. That was right around the time when we took the test. And that pregnancy, in fact, because the test hadn't come back yet, it was all kind of a timing issue. In that pregnancy, we still both used frozen embryos that we had from the first cycle, and we met the surrogate again in San Diego, but it wasn't a successful pregnancy, and kind of the signs were not, the signs were already not perfect, because we had this issue of the paternity. So it was actually in a way good that that we didn't complete our family journey through that pregnancy, and then that's why we then went back in 2014 for basically the second pregnancy. So anyway, that's my story. Maybe to give you a little bit more background how it went, and there's a lot of details, that a lot of things that you have to do basically, and some of this we're going to cover now in our in the next parts of the panel, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Melvin Thornton, and you're going to talk a little bit about the steps, the IVF-related steps, like overview of the screening and medical treatment. Did I give you the handout here? You can talk about these topics here, just the IVF-related topics.
Thank you very much. It's a wonderful journey that you had. The important thing to take home from stories like that is it's a possibility. A dream can come true. And the important thing is, remember, it's an individual journey. And a lot of times I speak to couples and they haven't thought about these things because they're just happy that they can have the chance of having a child. But the first thing I always want to think about it, well, what type of family do I want to have? What I see our family like 5 years from now. The both of us want to have a child. Do I want to have the child first? Do we want to have the child at the same time? So when you're talking to your fertility specialist, those are the things that you want to keep in mind as you go through your journey. And the other thing to remember is that there's a little bit of information in the journey that was really quick that I want you to realize, and that when you're in the world of fertility treatment and IVF, we're still dealing with nature. and things are not 100%. Okay, so you're wonderful. You had the first transfer, beautiful daughter, and then you had another transfer and you had a miscarriage. Those are things that can happen. You can have two AA grade embryos, B plus grade embryos. We can transfer them to the surrogate. Everything looks great, and then not work. And you go, well, why didn't it work? Because you have to remember we're dealing with nature. And on a journey, it's important to remember it takes about 2 to 3 transfers before the majority of people are successful. And the reason for that is because embryos are individuals. So if the first individual didn't work, doesn't have any bearing or reflection on the other individual embryo that you transfer. But the odds are using a young egg donor, you're most likely to find a very healthy embryo that you will be successful with. So don't be discouraged if it doesn't work the first time, or if you have a miscarriage the first time. You will get to that point, okay? So coming into the fertility clinic, a couple things that you want to talk about is number one, sperm, eggs, and your surrogate. As far as this initial testing for everyone, we always want to do a sperm analysis just to make sure there's sperm there. Sometimes we'll be surprised and find out there may not be sperm, or there may be very little sperm. So it's important that we do a sperm analysis ahead of time. And we do some initial testing for infectious disease screening. Those tests can be done locally, okay? So your initial screening can be done locally, and then the sperm that we use to fertilize the eggs, then you have to come to the U.S. for that, okay? The reason for that is because anytime that we're using technically what we have donor sperm, because you will be directed sperm donors, and that's because you're not intimate with the gestational carrier. So the FDA calls you a directed sperm donor. And because of that, we have to do special testing within 7 days of using that sperm to fertilize the eggs. Or if you're going to freeze sperm, we have to do it at the time that you freeze sperm. So you have 2 options. You can come to the U.S. one time, and that can be ahead of time where you freeze sperm. And then we do your infectious disease screening questionnaire, your FDA blood work, which is basically HIV, hepatitis B and C, something called cytomegalovirus, gonorrhea, and chlamydia, okay? And a physical examination, and we can freeze the sperm at that time. Or if you want to be there for the retrieval, then you would come in close to the time the donor is going to have a retrieval, and then we would do your blood work and questionnaire, and then we use a fresh sperm sample for the procedure, okay? A couple things to remember, fresh sperm is just as good as frozen sperm, okay? So if you're logistically, if it works better to have frozen sperm because you won't be there for the fresh, don't fear that that sperm is just as good as the fresh, okay? Next thing you always want to think about, the eggs, all right? So how do you choose an egg donor? Well, first of all, we don't choose the egg donor for you, okay? We want you to choose your egg donor. And the egg donors you can have from an agency, or some fertility centers have what we call in-house donor pools, okay? So what they let you do is that you'll have free access to the database, and in that database you'll see profiles. In the profiles you'll see things like height, weight, eye color, hair color, all these characteristics you'll see. And then what we ask you to do is to make the best selection that you feel is fit for you, okay? Sometimes it becomes difficult, so sometimes people say, well, I'm not sure of these 3, which one do you think is the best? And then we'll help you choose that donor. But you basically are selecting the donor based upon your criteria, okay? Types of donors, eggs out there are fresh eggs. You may hear about frozen eggs. Our technology has advanced in the last 6 to 7 years in that we can freeze eggs and embryos and have the same success rates as a fresh egg or a fresh embryo, okay? So when you look out there, you look at some of the databases, you may hear about frozen egg banks. Okay, in our facility, we have fresh eggs as well as a frozen egg bank as well. Which one would do better? Anytime someone's coming in and you're thinking about doing a split journey using a 50-50 sperm source, then at that time you'd be better off using fresh eggs, because with fresh eggs you may get more eggs to work with, okay? Whereas with frozen eggs, typically better for a single dad or a couple where only one person wants to be the father of the child, because you usually only get a certain allotment of eggs at that point in time. The thing to remember, a rule of thumb, is that it's very difficult to make a human. So in order to make one very good quality, what we call blastocyst, which is the embryo that can potentially implant, you have to go through 5 eggs, okay? So if your egg donor is going to give you 25 eggs, and you may end up with 4 healthy embryos available for transfer. So you can imagine if you're doing a 50-50 sperm split, it'd be better to get as many eggs as you can so you can have at least enough embryos for both of you to transfer. Whereas with a allotment of frozen eggs, usually they come in allotments of sometimes 6, sometimes 10. You can see the number of embryos you may end up with may only be 1 or 2 at the most. Okay. Once you've selected your egg donor, the egg donor undergoes initial screening, and her initial screening includes infectious disease testing. They will have a psychosocial screening evaluation by a mental health professional. They will also have genetic testing, okay? And genetic testing that they undergo, it looks for very common genetic disorders that are recessive. In other words, you have to have 2 abnormal genes that have the actual disease. They'll be screened for cystic fibrosis, something called spinal muscular atrophy, and then they'll have a full Jewish Ashkenazi panel. Even though they may not be Jewish or Ashkenazi, we do the full screen just to pick up any type of hereditary trait that they may have. We always do a chromosome testing to make sure that her chromosomes are normal as well. Then the next screening that she will get is to check to make sure she has enough eggs, because if she's going to be an egg donor, we want to make sure she has enough eggs to donate, as well as to have enough eggs for her in the future if she wants to have children. So one of the biggest criteria we're looking for is what is her egg reserve, and we do that with some hormone testing. We also do that with an ultrasound to make sure she has enough healthy eggs, okay? So at that point in time, she goes into, we think she's a great candidate. She goes into our database. You identify her. You say, wow, I really like this young lady. And at that point in time, we say it's a match. And then what happens now, the FDA gets involved again. And the FDA says, before we retrieve those eggs, I know she was screened already for infectious disease, but we have to screen her again, typically within 30 days of retrieving the eggs, okay? Most programs, 30 days is a bit long, so most programs will wait until we know she's ready to start her medications, which means that the retrieval of the eggs will be at about 2 weeks. So that's the time that we actually do the repeat testing. So the one thing to be reassured with is that by the time that you have your egg donor, she had been screened twice, first initially, and then second time she would get another screening for the FDA, okay? Other things that are out there is that I hear about that you may ask questions, well, what about a proven donor? What does it mean to have a proven donor? Well, a proven donor means that she's either gone through the process before and she's been successful and the couple has had a baby, or she may have gotten pregnant on her own and has a child of her own. We consider those proven donors. Or compared to a first-time donor, just basically means she hasn't donated before. When you look at the statistics will show you that there's no difference between a proven donor or a first-time donor, okay? Many times for the IVF clinic, there's a higher comfort level with a proven donor, and the reason for that is because she's already gone through the medications. We know what dosage for her to use, and we kind of get an idea of how she's going to respond. So if I have a couple that comes in, we're going to do a split sperm source. At that point in time, I say, well, you know, I want to make sure we get a donor who's has enough eggs to work with, so we may say, you know, you may consider a proven donor, okay? The next part is how many embryos do we transfer, okay? You can transfer 1 or 2 embryos. Depends upon what your wishes are. In the U.S., we have a big push to transfer 1 embryo. By transferring 1 embryo, your success rates are somewhat lower, about a 50% live birth rate with a single embryo transfer, but the risk of twins is about 3%, okay? If you transfer 2 embryos, your success rate is higher, but you're about 60%, but your chance of having twins is now about 45%. Some couples want to have twins, okay? But in the U.S., we really want to have singletons because we want you to have healthy babies. Twins have a higher risk of delivering earlier with prematurity, so we try to avoid that if we can. But if you want to transfer 2 embryos, we will transfer 2 embryos. Other things that we do in the fertility clinic is that we want to make sure we can identify if we're going to do single embryo transfers. Your clinic may offer you what we call checking for the chromosomes to make sure we can identify the best embryo for transfer. And then the last thing in my minute that I have is how do we screen the surrogate? First thing that happens is that before the surrogate is presented to you, her medical records are reviewed by the fertility clinic. We make sure she's a good candidate, see how many deliveries she's had, make sure she hasn't had too many C-sections, make sure she's healthy overall. And then at that point in time, she'll come in and then we'll do complete screening where we look at her uterus to make sure her uterus is nice and healthy, okay? So just to summarize, it's a fascinating journey. Just make sure you ask lots of questions, but plan your journey ahead of time so that way when you come to see the fertility specialist, we can kind of get an idea what's the best way that we can help you have a family. Thank you.
Hello. Jens, I'm about to blow your mind. I worked at CSP.
You didn't?
I was your trust account coordinator for your first journey, and then I worked for your lawyer for your second journey. I was one of the associate attorneys there.
Oh, so we know each other.
We do. We've never met, though. We've known each other for, I guess, probably 10 or 11 years just through emails now. And I got to hug you. This is amazing.
It's coming. Yeah. I was wondering, why do I know this
I know,
name?
like, why do I know her? And I was saying the same thing.
Yeah, that's amazing. Really.
Wow.
All the statements. I mean, you get those financial statements, of course.
That was me.
Not always good news.
Right. How funny. What a small world.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was just a moment. So, hey, I'm Molly O'Brien. It's really nice to see everybody. Thank you for coming out. I know, right? I've obviously been in this field a very long time. I started working at the Center for Surrogate Parenting in 2004. And so I have a lot of experience with agencies and how things work. And then I became a lawyer after that. So I welcome you to come talk to me about any aspect of the journey at all. But today, right now, we're going to talk about the legal parts of doing surrogacy in the United States and how that ties in to the German aspects, because Germany is very specific about exactly what they want and what they need in order for you to be recognized as parents back home. So let's look at the legal process in two buckets. Your first one is your contract between you and your surrogate mother, and the second one is once you're pregnant, there's going to be a court order naming you as the parents. So let's talk about the contract phase first. There are certain things that will need to go into your contract that Mandy will tell you about that if they aren't in there or are not addressed properly could affect your parental rights later, correct? Yes. Okay. So the contract is also going to deal with the financial promises between you and the surrogate and more of the warm and fuzzy things like making sure that she always follows the doctor's orders, ensuring that you both feel the same way about the number of embryos to implant, how you feel about terminating a pregnancy or reducing a pregnancy. These sorts of things are all dealt with in the contract. The contract will vary slightly depending on what state your surrogate lives in. If your surrogate lives in California, which is where I'm licensed, there are very specific requirements, as well as the German requirements, that are going to go in there. So it's important to engage an attorney in the state where your surrogate lives. And that attorney from the beginning, from the contract phase, needs to be in touch with your German lawyer to ensure that everything is proper in there, because it's really hard to fix those things after the fact, okay? So set up a good team from the beginning. So once the contract is all done and it's signed by everybody, then the doctor is allowed to start the medical process. They actually need a letter from the lawyers saying that everybody entered into a contract before medications for the cycle can begin. So once that happens, it's kind of like the completion of the first phase, the contract phase. Around this time, too, you're going to organize your surrogate's insurance. You're going to make sure that you have your embryos graded and whatnot. So that's all going to be happening around this time. Once you're confirmed pregnant, your IVF doctor is going to monitor with your surrogate for about the first trimester of the pregnancy, somewhere around 8 to 10 to 12 weeks. Then the surrogate's going to be released to her own obstetrician. Around that time, which is around the beginning of the second trimester, is when the legal process will begin if your surrogate resides in a state where you can get a pre-birth order. Now, if your surrogate resides in a state like yours did, you can only do post-birth orders there. So it's a little bit different depending on what state your surrogate lives in. So again, consult a professional in the state where your surrogate lives, okay? We all clear on that? That's so important. But let's talk about the California pre-birth order because a lot of people really want that and really like that. The pre-birth order process is pretty straightforward. As long as you have that properly drafted contract, you're the parents from the moment you sign that contract, prior to conception, in fact. So you might wonder, well, why do we need to go to court then? And the reason is because the hospital is going to assume that whoever gives birth is the parent. So we need to give the hospital a document that shows that that's not, in fact, the parent, that you're the parents, and that we want the birth certificate to read how we want it to read, which we can get creative with. So the court order will take away any parental rights that the surrogate might have had, and it will make sure that you have all the rights and also all the decision making. The parental order also needs to have very specific language for the German authorities, such as best interest of the child and things like that. So again, it's also important to be in touch with your German attorney and your U.S. attorney at this time to make sure that you're set up for success when you return home, okay? Once the birth occurs, then the hospital is going to ask you to fill out some forms that will be based upon that court order. You'll sign those, and you can get the birth certificate. The birth certificate process can take anywhere from 2 days to sometimes 14 days, sometimes a little bit longer. This is going to be dependent upon where your surrogate lives. Some areas are very fast and some are very slow. So talk to your lawyer. They should be able to know the localities and the specifics of all those areas. Once you've got your U.S. birth certificate, then you will apply for a U.S. passport. And that's the passport that you will travel back to Germany on, okay? The passport process is about 2 to 5 days. You can pay an expediter to get it in 24 to 48 hours, but a lot of times that's not necessary to pay for because you're already going to be in the States for about 2 weeks after birth, waiting for medical clearance and things like that. So that's how that's going to work as far as getting the U.S. passport. Once you've returned home, you'll talk to Mandy about what you need to do in order to get your paperwork in order there. I assume everybody would like me to touch on insurance a little bit as well, because that's a really big deal. Okay, so you've got 2 types of insurance to consider. You have your surrogate's insurance, and you have insurance for the baby. Let's talk about the surrogate. That's pretty straightforward. The surrogate's insurance will cover her obstetrical care and delivery. You should have your attorney and an insurance broker look over this policy to make sure there's no risks to you and no risks to the surrogate for using it, such as you don't want a policy that particularly excludes her acting as a surrogate. The insurance in the United States works very different than it does everywhere else. You still make payments. It doesn't just cover everything. So expect to pay a yearly maximum towards the insurance. What insurance does give you is it gives you that maximum. And you know that as long as you follow the rules, you'll never spend more than that amount of money, okay? That's the really straightforward part. The baby's bills, and if you want to get insurance for the baby, is the far more complicated part. So when the child is born in the U.S., the child is a U.S. citizen, and you have 3 options of how you want to pay for those bills. You might even have 4, but let's talk about the 3 major ones. The first one is Lloyd's of London. Lloyd's of London is an insurance company that underwrites insurance policies specifically written for children born in the U.S. through surrogacy to international intended parents. Because this plan is written specifically for this purpose, it's risk-free. However, it is quite expensive. It's my understanding that the premium on a singleton baby policy is $35,000. Twins, $99,000. So it's ridiculous. But it's risk-free. So if you have a lot of money to throw away, get this plan. So what everybody else does is deals with the other 2 options. If you have a very healthy birth, maybe either twins that are born pretty full term or a single baby that's born full term and has no medical complications, you should expect the child to stay in hospital between 2 and 5 days after birth. That is typically under a cash rate at the hospital with no insurance. You're probably looking at $4,000 to $6,000. Now, the risk with this is that there's no limit, like the insurance gives you a limit. So a lot of people don't like that unknown. So you do have the option of purchasing insurance for the child in the United States. The child is a U.S. citizen. You are not purchasing a plan because you're not eligible unless you have U.S. citizenship. But the child is a U.S. citizen, and I would argue under Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, that you're obligated to buy insurance because all citizens now are. However, there is a risk because there is no intent for the child to stay in the U.S., so there's no residency intent. So while it hasn't happened to my knowledge, it's everybody's fear that an insurance company might see that this child is born to non-US parents, there's no intent to stay there, and then they might revoke the policy. Now, do they have the right to do that? I don't think they do. Some people think that the insurance company has an argument and could do that, but it is a risk, and you need to know that that's a risk. Some things people are doing to get around that risk are to keep the policy in place for at least a year, long after they've returned home, even though they're not using it. That kind of will keep things unalerted to the insurance company. But you need a US address in order to get that insurance policy, so you should start thinking about that, having a US address to do that. You cannot use your surrogate's address for this, okay? Your surrogate is not the mother, right? We've made that very clear. So it is wholly improper to ever use her insurance unless she lives in the state where Jens's surrogate lived. Minnesota only allows for post-birth declarations of parentage. So there's this, I think it's 2 to 3 days after birth you can get the parentage order. So in states like that, it's totally fine because there is no other parent for those 2 to 3 days. So you have to use her insurance. There's nothing else. So that's kind of one of those possible fourth options. Another one is, I believe that there are some German insurances that will cover children in other countries. So you should talk to your attorney in Germany about this and whether or not it's an option for you. Okay?
Great, thank you.
Yes.
Hello, my name is Mandy Pecher, and I'm a German attorney. I'm also a US attorney, but I mainly practice German law out of my office in Dresden. And I'm quite often also in the United States and practice there too. But what I'm here for here today is I would like to give you a brief overview of what you need to do once you come back with your child born through surrogacy. And it sounds like you can start once you come back, but actually, as Molly was saying, you have to start planning ahead of time, because once you forgot specific steps, it makes it much more difficult in Germany to basically legalize your child. As I said, I'm a German attorney, and actually I wanted to talk German, so I'm not sure how we're going to do this. Ja, I mean, who auf Deutsch ist besser?
But it's not relevant for the people who are not Germans here.
Yes.
So you might as well speak German.
Okay, then I'm going to switch over to German, and sorry for not hearing it. Okay, dann fangen wir jetzt auf Deutsch an. Also es geht im Prinzip ja darum, dass Sie Ihr Kind bekommen und dass Sie dann nach Deutschland kommen und in Deutschland auf alle Fälle die deutsche Staatsbürgerschaft erwerben wollen für das Kind, was bewiesen wird durch den deutschen Pass. Und dafür sind halt bestimmte rechtliche Schritte schon im Vorfeld notwendig. Und jetzt haben sicherlich viele von euch schon recht viel über den deutschen Prozess gehört. Und vor ein paar Jahren, und zwar im Dezember 2014, hat sich sehr viel geändert. Da kam nämlich die Supreme Court Decision, die BGH-Entscheidung wurde erlassen. Und seit dieser BGH-Entscheidung denken jetzt viele Eltern, alles klasse, alles super, wir brauchen nicht mehr viel machen. Ganz so ist es leider nicht. Weil die BGH-Entscheidung macht es wesentlich einfacher, das Kind in Deutschland zu legalisieren, weil was der BGH gesagt hat, ist, dass Elternurteile, die in einem anderen Land erlassen worden sind, nunmehr nicht mehr gegen den Public Policy verstößt, also nicht mehr gegen den Ordre public verstößt, sondern anerkennungsfähig sind in Deutschland mit der Rechtsfolge, dass beide Intended Parents, beide Wunscheltern, also beide Väter, in die deutsche Geburtsurkunde eingetragen werden können. Um entscheiden zu können, inwiefern man das BGH-Urteil in Deutschland benutzen kann, muss man halt gucken, von welchem Sachverhalt der BGH ausgegangen ist. Und das ist ganz wichtig, und zwar, wenn man sich das anschaut, die Leihmutter in dem BGH-Fall war unverheiratet gewesen. Die Väter hatten eine eingetragene Lebenspartnerschaft Und nach deutschem Recht hatten die Väter eine deutsche wirksame Vaterschaftsanerkennung gemacht und auch verschiedene Sorgeerklärungen abgegeben. Dann hatten sie zusätzlich ein kalifornisches Elternurteil, also kein kein Adoptionsurteil, sondern ein Elternurteil, in dem gesagt wurde, dass die deutschen Eltern die Eltern des Kindes sind. Und ferner, und das ist ein ganz wichtiger Punkt, den der BGH auch zum Ausdruck gebracht hat, gab es keine biologische Verwandtschaft oder genetische Verbindung zwischen der Leihmutter und dem Kind. Auf der anderen Seite hat der BGH aber auch gesagt, dass es mindestens eine genetische Beziehung zwischen Wunschelternteil 1 und Wunschelternteil 2 und Kind geben muss, also jeweils zwischen Kind und einem der Väter oder einem der Eltern. Und die Rechtsfolge war dann, dass der BGH den Standesbeamten angewiesen hat, eine Geburtsurkunde, eine deutsche Geburtsurkunde auszustellen, in der beide Eltern als Eltern benannt werden. Und dann haben sich natürlich alle gefreut und sagten, ja, jetzt sind wir die Eltern des Kindes, auch in Deutschland. Was der BGH in seiner Entscheidung nicht entschieden hat, ist, wie das Kind und ob das Kind die deutsche Staatsbürgerschaft erworben hat. Und das brauchte der BGH auch nicht entscheiden, weil wir hatten eine formwirksame Vaterschaftsanerkennung nach dem deutschen Gesetz, die damals vor dem deutschen Konsulat abgegeben worden ist. Das heißt, der BGH musste in seiner Entscheidung nicht sagen, hat das Kind die deutsche Staatsbürgerschaft erworben oder nicht. Das ging automatisch, weil eine vorgeburtliche Vaterschaftsanerkennung abgegeben worden ist. Das heißt, um den BGH oder die Entscheidung des BGHs zu benutzen, bleiben trotzdem noch ein paar Fragen offen, nämlich wie und wann erwirbt das Kind die deutsche Staatsbürgerschaft. Die nächste Sache, die wichtig für deutsche Eltern ist die Krankenversicherung. Wie schaffe ich das, im Prinzip die deutsche private Krankenversicherung für das Kind in den USA zu benutzen? Und der nächste Punkt ist Elterngeld und Kindergeld und Elternzeit, die man beantragen kann aufgrund des BGH-Beschlusses in dem Moment, wo wo das US-Urteil in Deutschland anerkannt wird. Ja. Und von daher, wenn man sich den gesamten Prozess anschaut, was das BGH-Urteil gemacht hat, ist, es hat die früher erforderliche Stiefkindadoption ersetzt. Das heißt, früher hatte man den einen Vater zum Vater gemacht durch eine Vaterschaftsanerkennung oder Vaterschaftsanfechtung. Dann war der Vater und um den zweiten Vater auch zum rechtlichen Vater zu machen, musste man eine Stiefkindadoption machen. Diese Stiefkindadoption muss man heutzutage nicht mehr machen, sondern man kann ganz einfach vor dem örtlich zuständigen Amtsgericht einen Antrag auf Anerkennung des US-amerikanischen Elternurteils stellen. Und damit kann man anschließend den Antrag bei dem Standesamt stellen auf Ausstellung einer deutschen Geburtsurkunde mit beiden deutschen Vätern oder mit beiden Vätern in der deutschen Geburtsurkunde. Bei der Auswahl der Surrogate ist es immer noch wichtig, ob Sie eine verheiratete Leihmutter auswählen oder eine unverheiratete Leihmutter auswählen. Bei einer verheirateten Surrogate ist es so, dass automatisch der Ehemann der Vater des Kindes ist. Also der Ehemann der Leihmutter der Vater des Kindes ist. Und diesen muss man erstmal im Rahmen eines Vaterschaftsanfechtungsprozesses oder heutzutage geht das ein bisschen schneller per DNA-Test aus dem rechtlichen Prozess mit rauskicken. Nachdem man die Vaterschaftsanfechtung gemacht hat und festgestellt wurde, dass der biologische Vater der Vater des Kindes ist, dann würde man im Anschluss daran das US-Urteil anerkennen lassen, um dann den zweiten Vater wieder in die deutsche Geburtsurkunde zu bekommen oder eintragen zu lassen. Jetzt von der praktischen Seite ist es so, wenn wir zum Beispiel 2 Väter haben und es sollen 2 Embryos eingesetzt werden, von jedem Vater ein Embryo, dann müssen Sie eine unverheiratete Surrogate nehmen. Weil wenn Sie eine verheiratete Surrogate nehmen, hätte man im Anschluss das so, dass man eine Anfechtung von Vater A hinsichtlich Kind A machen müsste und von Vater B eine Anfechtung fürs Kind B machen müsste. Und das wird schon kompliziert, während wenn man eine unverheiratete Surrogate hat, kann man einfach eine Vaterschaftsanerkennung machen, weil man kann auch die Vaterschaft für ein Kind, für ein nicht biologisches Kind anerkennen. Und mit dieser deutschen Vaterschaftsanerkennung sind Sie dann der deutsche rechtliche Vater des Kindes. Wenn die verheiratet ist, die Surrogate, muss man aufpassen, wer anfechtungsberechtigt ist und dass eine Anfechtungsfrist besteht und dass ein DNA-Test notwendig ist zwischen dem, der als Vater anerkannt werden soll, und dem Kind. Das heißt, wenn Sie in Deutschland leben wollen und einer von Ihnen ist nicht deutscher Staatsbürger, dann kann der nicht der biologische Vater sein, weil nur durch die Vaterschaftsanerkennung oder Anfechtung der biologische Vater, der dann zum Vater erklärt wird, dem Kind die deutsche Staatsbürgerschaft geben kann. Ja, also da muss man dann ein bisschen aufpassen, wie man das macht. Wenn dann das US-amerikanische Urteil vorliegt, wie Molly schon gesagt hat, wird das in Deutschland anerkannt, und da möchte ich wirklich nochmal ganz doll darauf hinweisen, dass es ganz, ganz wichtig ist, dass Ihr amerikanischer Anwalt und Ihr deutscher Anwalt oder Ihr Anwalt in Ihrem Heimatland wirklich zusammenarbeiten. Für Deutschland ist es ganz, ganz wichtig, Molly hat das gerade angesprochen, und da kann man sehr gut mit Molly zusammenarbeiten, weil sie kopiert das, was wir für Deutschland brauchen, in ihr Parentage Judgment mit rein, und der Richter unterschreibt das dann. Also da müssen Sie wirklich aufpassen, dass Sie eine gute Zusammenarbeit zwischen Ihrem Heimatanwalt haben und dem Anwalt in den USA, damit das wirklich problemlos in Deutschland funktioniert. Bestimmte Sachen, die drin stehen müssen in dem Judgment, sind erstens, das US-amerikanische Gericht muss zuständig gewesen sein. Alle Parteien sind gehört worden in Amerika. Alle Parteien waren anwaltlich vertreten. Es muss ausdrücklich ein Ausspruch drin sein, dass beide Eltern das sofortige Sorgerecht und alleinige Sorgerecht haben und dass beide Eltern des Kindes sind. Wenn das so drin steht und dann Sie haben eine Apostille dran gemacht, dann kann man das relativ gut vor dem örtlichen Amtsgericht anerkennen lassen. Was die Erfahrung momentan ist, dass die örtlichen Amtsgerichte einen DNA-Test haben wollen. Das heißt, wenn Sie eine Eispende nehmen, dann müssen Sie schon gleich in Amerika einen DNA-Test zwischen Leihmutter und Kind machen, weil Sie müssen nachweisen können, dass gerade kein genetischer Link zwischen Leihmutter und Kind besteht. Weil wenn die Leihmutter, es gibt zum Beispiel auch Fälle, wo die Leihmutter die eigenen Eier nimmt, ist selten, aber es gibt, dann funktioniert die Anerkennung über das BGH-Urteil nicht. Das heißt, Eispende, kein Problem, aber DNA-Test gleich in Amerika machen. Das heißt, was am Ende jetzt bei rauskommt im Rahmen dieser tollen BGH-Entscheidung, ist man guckt immer noch, ob die Surrogate verheiratet ist oder nicht. Es funktioniert heute fast genauso gut mit einer verheirateten Surrogate. Früher war es so, dass wir stets gesagt haben, weil wir die Stiefkindadoption brauchten, Leihmutter muss unverheiratet sein. Heute kann man das in einem Verfahren, die Vaterschaftsanfechtung und Anerkennung, zusammen machen. Das heißt, sie muss nicht mehr verheiratet sein. Allerdings, und das müssen Sie sich mit Ihrem Anwalt oder der Agentur auch absprechen, wenn Sie die deutsche Krankenversicherung für Ihr Baby benutzen wollen, geht nur mit der privaten Versicherung, und Sie müssen zum Zeitpunkt der Geburt des Kindes der Vater des Kindes sein. Dann können Sie die deutsche Krankenkasse nehmen, und Sie sind aber nur der Vater des Kindes mit der Geburt, wenn die Surrogate unverheiratet war, weil dann machen Sie vorher eine vorgeburtliche Vaterschaftsanerkennung. Macht das Sinn? Nee, nicht Pre-Birth Order, sondern die Vaterschaftsanerkennung. Ja, und wenn Sie die haben, dann können Sie, je nachdem, was Sie für eine private Krankenkasse haben oder Krankenversicherung haben, können Sie das Baby über die deutsche Krankenversicherung machen. Da sind noch ein paar Kleinigkeiten drin, auf die man achten muss, aber das würde jetzt zu weit gehen. Das heißt, wenn Sie deutsche Krankenkasse verwenden wollen, muss die Surrogate unverheiratet sein. Surrogate muss auch unverheiratet sein, wenn Sie je ein Embryo verwenden wollen von jedem Vater und wenn Sie Elterngeld und Elternzeit beantragen wollen. Und nicht erst ab dem Zeitpunkt der Antragstellung des Anfechtungsantrages muss die Surrogate auch unverheiratet sein. Wenn Sie sagen, Elterngeld, Elternzeit ist mir egal, ja, dann kann die auch gut verheiratet sein, die Leihmutter.